Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. So, you wanted to get to the bottom of all the latest research on metformin.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, whether a dad's metformin use impacts the chances of birth defects.
Yeah.
And, well, a lot of people have been asking about this. Lucky for us, we have a fascinating new study, hot off the press.
Off the press.
Just came out in October
Mm-hmm.
in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal.
Yep.
And the good news is it offers a good bit of reassurance. So this isn't just a small study either. It's a massive one. Over 3.2 million pregnancies.
That's right.
Across two very different populations,
Right.
Norway and Taiwan. So
Yeah.
that's pretty impressive right off the bat.
It is a big study. And I think that's one of the things that makes this deep dive interesting is that metformin is such a common medication.
Yeah.
And there has been kind of a back and forth on this topic. There was a previous study that kind of raised some concerns.
Right.
And now we have this big study and it kind of offers a different perspective.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit because I know a few years back there was a Danish study that came out.
Right.
And I remember reading about it, and it did raise some eyebrows, for me at least.
Yes.
So could you remind us, what was it about that study that initially sparked concern?
Yeah, so that Danish study, what they found was a possible connection between fathers taking metformin and then their babies having a higher risk of birth defects,
Okay.
specifically genital birth defects in boys.
Ah, I see. And so thinking back, what was the reasoning? What was the biological mechanism they were concerned about?
Yeah, so the thinking was, well, metformin, we know, has the potential to cause what we call epigenetic changes to DNA.
Hmm.
So essentially, these are like chemical tweaks that can kind of switch genes on or off without actually changing the DNA sequence itself.
Got it.
And these tweaks can potentially be passed down, through sperm.
Okay, so basically the Danish study suggested that maybe these epigenetic changes
Mm-hmm.
somehow were impacting fetal development, leading to that higher risk.
Yeah.
Okay, so fast forward to today, we've got this brand new research.
Yep.
And it sounds like it's painting a slightly different picture.
Yeah, it does. And one of the things that makes this new study so powerful is the way that they designed it.
Okay.
So they were very careful to compare fathers with type 2 diabetes who were taking metformin to a similar group of fathers with type 2 diabetes who were not taking metformin.
Okay, so they were essentially controlling for the diabetes in a way.
Exactly. Because diabetes itself can increase the risk of birth defects.
Right, regardless of any medication.
Regardless of any medication.
Okay, that's a good point.
So they really wanted to isolate the effect of the metformin.
Yeah, I see. So they're really trying to pinpoint, is it the diabetes or is it the metformin?
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like they went to great lengths to really control for as many factors as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading through the study and I noticed they use a method called overlap propensity score weighting. Yeah. And I have to admit, as someone who's not a statistician, that sounds a little intimidating. Can you kind of unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, so it is a kind of a mouthful, but basically, think of it as they created a matched set of dads, right? They wanted to make sure that the groups they were comparing were as similar as possible.
On all those other factors that could be playing a role.
Exactly, like age, lifestyle, overall health. And so by doing that, it really increases their confidence that any difference that they see in the birth defect rates is truly linked to the metformin use.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So they're really trying to minimize the bias and be as accurate as possible.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about the design of the study. We've talked about why they did it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And now I think everyone's waiting with bated breath. What did this meticulously designed study actually find?
Well, here's the headline news. They found no association. They found no statistically significant association between fathers taking metformin during sperm development and any increase in the risk of birth defects.
So that includes those specific genital birth defects
It does.
that the earlier Danish study had pointed to.
Exactly. They looked at a wide range of birth defects, including those specific genital malformations, and they just didn't see any link.
Okay, that's really good news to hear.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this is really, potentially putting those earlier concerns to rest.
It really does. What's even more compelling, I think, is that they didn't just find no association overall.
Mm-hmm.
They also looked at dosage.
Okay.
And guess what? No dose-response relationship either.
So even if a dad was taking a higher amount of metformin,
Doesn't seem to matter.
it wasn't impacting the risk.
Nope.
Okay, so that's another point in the no association column.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got a huge study carefully designed comparisons,
Right.
no dose response. It's starting to seem pretty clear-cut here. Anything else they did just to make sure their findings were rock solid?
Yeah, they actually went a step further, and they did what's called a sibling-matched analysis.
Okay.
So what they did was they compared siblings born to the same father.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those siblings were conceived while the dad was on metformin, and some were conceived when he wasn't.
Okay.
And the results held up. No difference in the rates of birth defects between those siblings.
So even when you control for genetics, because,
Exactly.
you've got the same parents, you've got presumably similar environments,
Right.
metformin still had no impact.
Right. It just strengthens their conclusion.
Okay, that's really interesting. So this must be music to the ears of dads with type 2 diabetes who are thinking about starting a family.
I would think so.
But of course, as the ever-curious host, I have to ask, were there any limitations to this study that we should be aware of?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, no study is perfect. So it is important to be aware of the inherent limitations of observational studies,
Mm-hmm.
like this one. Because remember, they're looking at existing data, so we can see relationships, but it doesn't definitively prove that, A caused B.
Right, that one thing directly led to the other.
Right.
Okay, so there could always be other factors at play.
Right.
Sort of like those hidden variables we talked about before.
Exactly. And even with those controls that they put in place, they did a lot to control for that. There's always the possibility of what we call unmeasured confounding factors.
Okay.
So those are things that might be influencing both, metformin use and birth defect risk, but that they couldn't account for in the study.
Because they just weren't in the data set.
Exactly.
So there's always going to be a little degree of uncertainty.
Right.
Even with this huge sample size.
Yeah.
And all the controls they put in place.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really well-done study. I think, they did a lot to minimize these limitations, but I think it does highlight just how complex this kind of research is.
Absolutely, it really does. So it sounds like, there's always room for further research to build upon these findings.
Always.
And explore new avenues to kind of solidify our understanding.
Yep.
Okay, so what are those next steps? What kind of studies could help fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think one area that's really ripe for further exploration is directly measuring those epigenetic changes in sperm.
Okay.
Because remember, this study, they looked at filled prescriptions as kind of like a proxy for metformin use. So clever approach.
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually tell us how much metformin the men were actually taking or how consistently.
Right, because you might fill a prescription.
You might.
And it might just sit in your medicine cabinet.
Exactly.
So there's an assumption there that might not be entirely accurate.
Exactly. And then there's, the question of, do these epigenetic changes actually happen in men taking metformin? And if they do, how do they relate to defect risk?
Right.
And that's something this study couldn't really get at because they weren't measuring those changes directly.
Right. So that's sort of the missing link.
Yeah.
You've got the metformin.
Yeah.
And then the question is it actually causing these epigenetic changes?
Mm-hmm.
And then if so, are those changes actually leading to these birth defects?
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
What about other types of studies?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could always use larger studies, with more detailed information on specific types of birth defects.
Okay.
The more data we have, the better equipped we'll be to really understand the nuances of this relationship.
Yeah.
And, rule out even the slightest possibility of a connection.
Okay, so, even though this study offers a good bit of reassurance, the research, the scientific journey continues.
Always.
It never ends.
It's ongoing.
All right, so let's step back for a minute. Put all this in perspective for our listeners.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway here? What's the bottom line on metformin and birth defect risks?
Well, to put it simply, this large, well-designed study provides very strong evidence that paternal metformin use is not associated with an increased risk of birth defects.
Wow.
And I think that's incredibly reassuring news for men with type 2 diabetes who are thinking about having kids.
Yeah, it really is. It sounds like they can, continue to manage their diabetes with metformin and feel confident that they're not putting their future children at risk.
Yeah, and of course, I always say it's important to discuss your individual health and medication use with your doctor.
Of course.
They can provide personalized guidance.
Always good advice.
But, I think this study really is a positive step forward. And, it adds to this growing body of evidence suggesting that metformin is a safe and effective treatment
Absolutely.
for men with type 2 diabetes, even when they're family planning.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what I find really fascinating about all this is just, how this research highlights this complex interplay between medications
Mm-hmm.
and reproductive health.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's complicated.
It's complicated. It's not always straightforward.
Not at all. You know, what I find really interesting is how this study goes beyond just looking at metformin in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
It really underscores the importance of understanding the broader context of health.
Right.
It's not just about the medication itself, but about managing your diabetes overall.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Right.
It makes you wonder what other lifestyle factors might be playing a role in all of this.
Absolutely.
It really opens up a whole new line of inquiry, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
It's like this study has unexpectedly cracked open a door to a much bigger conversation about how, overall health and lifestyle choices might have ripple effects on future generations.
It's fascinating. We often get so fixated on individual factors like a specific medication, but this research really emphasizes that health is multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's a tapestry woven together by genetics, by lifestyle choices, environmental influences. It's all interconnected.
It really is. And sometimes those connections can surprise us.
They do.
I mean, who would have thought that a deep dive into metformin and birth defects would lead to this conversation about the far-reaching impacts of overall health?
Yeah, you never know where these deep dives are going to take us.
Exactly. But it really speaks to the importance of taking a holistic approach to healthcare.
Absolutely.
And understanding all these intricate relationships.
We can't just focus on one piece of the puzzle in isolation.
Right.
To really grasp the complexities of health, we need to look at the whole picture.
Yeah.
How all the pieces fit together. It's like you said, those beautiful, intricate tapestries. Each thread contributes to the overall design and beauty of the final artwork.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
And it makes me realize just how much we still don't know.
Right.
What other hidden connections are out there?
So much to learn.
The possibilities are endless.
I love that. The possibilities are endless.
Well, on that note of endless possibility, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We covered a lot of ground today. We went from those initial concerns about metformin and birth defects to this reassuring new research. And, along the way, we've uncovered some really fascinating insights into just the interconnectedness of health.
Absolutely.
And the importance of, that holistic approach to well-being. So thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Always fun to chat about these things.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thanks for sticking with us. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore. Until then, keep those minds curious and never stop questioning.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.